The SIE exam is a pretty easy test to pass if you set your mind to it and you prepare well. But it's kind of difficult, so you really need to make sure you prepare. But it's also sort of easy, so you can definitely get there. Just follow these tips. The SIE is a great new tool that was just instituted 3 or 4 years ago by FINRA that allows individuals who are not yet working for financial services firms to start to build their qualifications towards doing just that. FINRA knew there was this age-old problem that they needed more financial services professionals, but they were only going to let licensed people become professionals. However, you had to be already working at a firm for the firm to sponsor you to take the exams. So unless you already worked somewhere, you couldn't start working somewhere, which was just a weird issue. The SIE exam resolves that because people without prior finance experience can take the test, which will show employers not only that they have some level of aptitude, that they should be able to handle clients and investments, but also that they're serious about switching careers or starting a new career in the financial services field. It's not super expensive to take. You can actually find many free study guides online now, but even registering for and taking the SIE exam is relatively inexpensive and approachable for most adults in America. But can you actually pass the test? To start yourself off in the right direction, to show financial services companies that you're serious about trying to work there, can you make it happen? The answer is probably yes, but it's hard to benchmark your ability to pass a test unless you've tried to prepare for a relatively large licensing exam in the past. Even if you've never taken a licensing exam of this type before, with the right preparation, you should be able to clear it. So in this video, I'm going to tell you the exact study strategies that I used and how I passed the Series 7 exam back in the day, which the SIE is now a part of, in only about 6 weeks of study. I'm not bragging here, but I scored an 88% on the Series 7 exam, and I think that just goes to show that if you follow the methodologies I lay out here, you should perform very well on the SIE. The primary factor in your ability to pass this test is going to be the time that you put in studying for it. And I say that because there's not much material within the SIE that is much past college level algebra or history or economics or whatever other terminologies would relate to the type of content they quiz you on. So if you're someone who graduated from high school, you likely are smart enough to learn the information necessary to pass. You just have to actually study it enough. My recommendation is to log at least 100 hours of study to make sure that you are overly qualified to clear your SIE exam. I personally did 125 hours or so. Now I probably studied a little bit too much, so I maybe wasted a little bit of time during that study window, but I'm okay with that too. If you want to go above the 100 hours to overly prepare, that's a great strategy to pass. Just make sure not to understudy. That's really where you're going to get yourself into trouble. What I did was very simple. I earmarked 3 hours a day, every single day, in the evenings after work for about 6 weeks to studying. That's Monday to Monday, every week in a row. So that's 42 days that you sit down and study for 3 hours every day, and don't miss any days. Don't slack on this. If you do what you need to do, you'll be done within 4 to 6 weeks, and you'll be glad that you didn't take any days off. Just knock it out, get it done. The other advantage to not taking any days off during your study period is that all the information will constantly being refreshed in your mind, and even the first information or chapter 1 that you studied originally will have only been 4 or 6 weeks ago. So it's still sort of fresh when you start doing practice questions in the week before your real SIE exam. Now, if you study like 2 or 3 nights a week and let this go on for 6 months, obviously the stuff you studied 5 and 6 months ago is going to be less fresh in your mind, which is again why I'm saying condense it, put in the effort, put in the time, you'll thank yourself later. Now let's talk about how to approach each 3-hour study session and also what material to study with. And then at the end, the most important factor is that we'll cover how I approached the practice questions in the final 4 to 5 days before the test. Very simple again. You might notice a theme for me throughout this video. It's just keeping everything as simple as possible. My study plan was not anything that I built out in a study calendar. It wasn't some recommended order of chapters that I got from someone online. I literally took my study book, which for me was from Past Perfect, but you can get even a free study material online just about anywhere now. I took the study book, I opened the cover page and I started reading page 1. I read each page. I would take the little 5 to 10 question practice quizzes, which seemed to come every 3 or 4 pages if memory serves. And at the end of each chapter, I would take the chapter test that would test on the last, 30 or 40 pages of information I had read through. I'm making this sound very simple. However, it could be difficult, especially if you don't have a finance background yet. And that might be many of you watching this video. That's really one of the reasons why FINRA separated the SIE, the Securities Industries Essential Exam, as its own thing. It allows people who don't yet have any financial experience, maybe they're just out of high school, or maybe they've been working in a different industry, it allows them to try to get their foot in the door in this field. So if that's you, you might need to read very slowly because a lot of the terminology may be brand new to you, and maybe even through the content that you're reading, they might not give you definitions on terms that it's sort of assumed you would know, but maybe you don't actually. Don't feel bad about that at all. If you're new to the industry, there are plenty of things you're not gonna know. That's normal. So you might even need to slow it down so that as you're reading through, maybe you have your laptop next to you and you're Googling words or phrases or definitions just to make sure everything makes sense in your head as you go through it. Just make sure you're not using that laptop to go to like YouTube or Facebook or something that's gonna take away from your 3-hour session each evening. The point is, if you have to progress slowly, go slowly. And then when you get to the quizzes every 3 or 4 pages, you should feel relatively comfortable answering the questions because it's stuff you would have just studied that day or maybe the night prior. As you get to the chapter tests at the end of each of the, I think there are 8 chapters or something, don't quote me on that, you'll have a little bit more of a challenge to see if you remember the stuff that you studied maybe a week ago. And if you miss questions during those chapter tests, you just mark which ones you missed, make sure to go back to the content, read about what the right answer is, understand why you got it wrong and how you should have answered so that your brain learns the information. Back to my description of starting at page 1 and just reading, it's literally finish each chapter in order. When you finish that chapter test, you're going back through, teaching yourself about the questions that you got wrong. Then you start on the next chapter. So maybe now you're on page 20. You read page 20 and then 21 and then 22. And you just make sure you sit there for 3 hours a night. I think those 3-hour blocks are the best way to force yourself to put in enough time to make sure that you're actually learning all the information. What you'll find is that after 5 or 6 weeks or so, you probably will have progressed through all the content and done a handful of practice questions through the little quizzes and the practice tests. It probably will have been a bit of a struggle, like I said, especially if you're new, but maybe take a moment and just reflect on how much more financial industry jargon you will now know compared to what you did know only 6 or 8 weeks ago or however long you've been studying. It'll probably be a stark difference because there's a lot of jargon on the SIE. As a side point, you're probably not going to use 80% of the information you learn on this exam in your real career, but it doesn't matter. Don't focus on that. You really just need to learn as much as possible to answer 72% of the questions right on the exam or whatever the pass rate is. So once you've progressed through all that content, you need to do a round of either practice exams or just go through additional practice questions to make sure you really have a solid knowledge base. You want to make sure you're actually answering a lot of practice questions correctly. This is really where you're going to do a lot of the learning. And I say learning because when you originally passed through the content, you may have developed some understanding for it, but you didn't really cement that piece of material into your brain. Waiting a few weeks, sort of forgetting it, reading it, getting a question wrong, but kind of remembering, oh yeah, hey, I did read that, going back, seeing the content, and then relearning it and sort of teaching yourself, oh yeah, this is why the answer was this way. That process, because of the way the human brain works, that process is really where a lot of the valuable learning can happen. And so this final week before your SIE exam can be where you actually do the most learning. If you do all that correctly, you've studied 120 hours, you've taken hundreds of practice questions, and you've gotten yourself to the point where you can be confident in approaching many of those questions, then you're going to be ready to go in, sit down and knock out your SIE exam. You're going to be well prepared. You're going to be better prepared than probably 75% of the people in the exam room that day, and you'll give yourself a very high probability of passing. and really setting yourself off in the right direction to start your career in finance. If you have any questions about the SIE exam or the study process that I followed, feel free to drop me a comment on this video, send me an email. My email address is in the channel bio, or yeah, I guess those are the only two options. Don't try to come to my house or something like that. But anyway, if this was helpful, please give me a like and a subscribe to the channel. It is much appreciated. And as